What would you do if the sky itself turned against you? If one moment you were flying home for Christmas, thinking about gifts and family and cinnamon rolls, and the next you were alone in a world of ice and teeth and silence. No city, no roads, no help. Just you, the wreckage of a plane, and the knowledge that everything hunting you moves better in the snow than you do. This isn't a story about a crash. It's a story about what's left when the screaming stops. Emily hated flying, but she hated disappointing her mother more. That was the only reason she'd booked the last-minute Christmas flight from Chicago to a tiny regional airport in western Montana, the only way to reach the little mountain town where she'd grown up. The airport terminal had been crowded with people in ugly sweaters and Santa hats, kids tugging at parents' hands, holiday music playing too loud over tinny speakers. Emily had sat near the window with her backpack tucked against her legs, watching snow swirl in lazy spirals beyond the glass as de-icing trucks moved like slow, patient beetles around the parked planes. Her phone kept lighting up with messages: a selfie from her kid brother Jake in front of the Hart family's crooked Christmas tree, a string of heart emojis from her mom, a short "travel safe kiddo" text from her dad. She smiled at each one, but there was a knot in her stomach that wouldn't untie. On the plane, she'd gotten a window seat over the wing. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, jet fuel, and someone's too strong perfume. People were stuffing carry-ons into overhead bins, exchanging polite nods with strangers, shuffling into their narrow rows. Emily buckled her seatbelt and forced herself to breathe slowly. The man next to her, mid-40s in a flannel shirt and baseball cap, gave her a reassuring grin. "You look like you're headed somewhere colder than this," he joked. She laughed weakly, explaining she was going back home to Montana for the first time since moving away to Boston. He told her something about growing up in Idaho, about snowdrifts higher than minivans and wolves howling in the timber at night. She pretended not to flinch at the word wolves. It wasn't that she didn't like animals, she'd always loved dogs, but the backcountry was different. When she'd been 12, she'd gone camping with her dad in those same mountains. One night, something big had circled their tent, huffing and pawing at the ground, the nylon walls trembling with each exhale. Her dad had grabbed the bear spray and shouted into the darkness until whatever it was moved off, but the sound of that breathing had haunted her ever since. Bears, wolves, things that didn't care about dreams or finals or holiday plans, things that understood only hunger and territory and instinct. The plane pushed back from the gate with a jolt, engines whirring to life, the world outside smearing into streaks of light as they taxied. As they climbed into the sky, the city became a mesh of glittering veins disappearing under a blanket of cloud. Emily watched until there was nothing but gray-white and the occasional flash of sunlight on the wing. She put in her earbuds, scrolled to the playlist Jake had made her, "Christmas but Make It Sad," he'd titled it, and tried to relax. The turbulence started about an hour into the flight. At first, it was just a soft bump here and there, a gentle shudder that made plastic cups quiver on tray tables. She told herself it was normal, that planes were built for this, that pilots dealt with storms all the time. The seatbelt sign chimed back on. A crackling voice from the cockpit apologized for a bit of rough air ahead and asked the flight attendants to take their seats. Emily tightened her belt until it dug into her hips. The rough air turned to something uglier. The plane lurched, suddenly, violently, dropping just enough that her stomach seemed to stay suspended somewhere above her ribs. A baby started crying a few rows back. Overhead bins rattled, a few not properly latched banging open. A laptop bag tumbled out and hit the aisle with a dull thud. Emily's hands clamped down on the armrests. The man beside her muttered, it's okay," more to himself than to her. Lightning flashed outside, brief and white and too close. For a second, she saw the wing clearly. Rain, or was it snow, whipping past in horizontal lines. The plane bucked again, harder. Someone down the aisle screamed. Oxygen masks suddenly dropped with a series of mechanical clicks, swinging wild and absurd in front of people's faces. There was a collective inhale, the cabin's fear becoming a single living thing. Emily grabbed her mask in shaking hands, pulling the elastic over her head, tasting the rubber and canned oxygen and her own panic. The voice from the cockpit team again, but now it was shouting, almost drowned out by warning alarms. "Brace, brace!" Flight attendants echoed it. their rehearsed urgency now sounding like real terror. "Brace position, heads down, stay down." Emily folded over herself, forehead pressed to the seat in front of her, fingers laced behind her neck. The world became vibration, noise, the howl of engines pushed too hard, the shriek of metal responding. She had the strange, floating thought that she hadn't texted her mom back, that somewhere in her parents' house, in that living room with its mismatched couches and burned-out lamp in the corner, her phone would sit on the coffee table and light up with notifications no one would see. Then the thought was gone, swept away in a different kind of falling. The impact didn't feel like one thing, it felt like many. A sideways slam that wrenched her against the belt, a long, grinding slide that made her teeth rattle in her skull. Objects became projectiles, slamming into her shoulders and back. There was a scream cut off mid-note, a crack like a bone or a window or both. The lights went out. Something cold and vicious rushed in through a tear in the fuselage. And then suddenly, there was nothing but a heavy, unnatural silence. It was the cold that brought her back. Not sound, not light, just the pure, invasive cold pressing through her clothes, stealing her breath. Emily opened her eyes to darkness, then to a dim red glow from an emergency light somewhere overhead. The air smelled of fuel, burnt plastic, blood, and snow. Her ears rang. For a long moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. The seatbelt cut across her chest like a rope. Her head throbbed. Slowly, the shape of the world resolved. She was still in her seat, but the cabin was tilted at a sick angle. The aisle wasn't an aisle anymore. It was a slope. Overhead bins hung open, some ripped clean off. A suitcase had burst. Its contents, shirts, wrapped presents, a stuffed bear, scattered like strange, soft debris. A few rows ahead, the cabin wall had been torn away, leaving a jagged mouth open to the night. Snow blew in through the gap in fine, relentless streams. "Hello?" she croaked. Her voice sounded small and wrong in the frozen air. "Is anyone—" The word "there" stuck in her throat when she looked to her left. The man in the flannel shirt was still belted into his seat, his head lolled at an unnatural angle, eyes half open as if he'd simply dozed off in the middle of a conversation. The emergency light painted his skin in a dull, otherworldly red. Emily stared at him for a second, her mind refusing to connect the image to reality. Then, something inside her flinched away from it. She turned, gagging, fingers fumbling at her seatbelt buckle. She half fell, half crawled into the aisle, her knees hitting scattered plastic, metal, broken glass. Her left leg screamed with every movement, a hot, sharp pain below the knee. But when she pressed her hand there, she felt only swelling and something sticky that might have been blood. "Not shattered," she told herself. "Not broken. Just hurt. You're alive. You're alive." She said it out loud, as if the sound would anchor her. "I'm alive." There were other bodies, some slumped, still in their seats, some sprawled on the floor in positions that no living person could maintain. A little girl's pink sneaker lay alone in the aisle, its laces trailing, the foot inside it absent. Emily forced herself to look away, to crawl past without thinking about how many people had been laughing or scrolling through their phones an hour ago. Near the center of the cabin, a woman in her 50s was still breathing, wheezing unevenly, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. Emily reached her, pressing a trembling hand to the woman's shoulder. Hey, it's okay, I'm here," she said, the automatic comfort a lie she told anyway. The woman's eyes found her, glassy and disoriented. "Did we go down?" the woman whispered. "Yeah," Emily said, tears freezing on her cheeks almost as soon as they formed. "But we made it. We're going to be okay. I'll get help." She didn't know where help would come from or how, but it felt cruel to say anything else. "Tell," the woman's chest shuddered, "tell my son that Christmas." Whatever sentence she'd started dissolved into a wet rattle. Her eyes lost focus, her body going slack under Emily's hand. Emily stayed there for a long heartbeat, her brain insisting the woman might still move, might still blink. When she didn't, Emily pulled her hand back as if from a hot stove. Something heavy inside her sank. She swallowed, the motion painful. "Okay," she whispered to the empty air, "I'll tell him." It was a promise to a dead stranger that she couldn't possibly keep, but the words steadied her somehow. The wind moaned through the torn-out section of fuselage. Snowflakes drifted into the cabin, touching upturned palms and faces, melting into tiny, shining spots on dark clothing before refreezing. Somewhere a panel creaked. Somewhere something metal fell, clattering. She had to move. Emily picked through the wreckage, searching for anything that might matter. She found a half-open overhead bin that hadn't been completely smashed. Inside were a few intact carry-ons. In one bag, she found a heavy winter coat, a pair of thick gloves, a flashlight with a cracked lens that still turned on when she twisted the end. In another, energy bars, a reusable water bottle that was miraculously unbroken, a small first aid kit. She added them all to her own backpack, fingers numb but determined. At the front of the cabin, the door to the cockpit was jammed crooked on its hinges. She squeezed through a narrow gap into a space that didn't look like any cockpit she'd ever imagined. Panels dark, windshields fractured and starred, the right side completely shattered inward. Snow lay in a thin sheet over the controls. She couldn't look too long at the twisted shapes crumpled in the pilot and co-pilot seats. Her eyes skated instead to the radio. She didn't know much about radios, but she knew enough to look for a headset and a button. Static hissed when she flipped a few switches. Once, she thought she heard a faint, distant voice beneath the noise, but it might have been her own imagination layering hope onto randomness. "Mayday! Mayday! This is flight..." She stopped, realizing she didn't even remember the flight number. Her brain supplied only useless fragments: the boarding group number, the gate number, the Starbucks order she'd gotten at the airport. "This is a passenger from the Chicago to..." She swallowed. "We've crashed in the mountains. I don't know where. If anyone hears this, please respond." Silence answered her, the hiss of static and the howl of the wind through broken glass. After a while, the radio itself sputtered and died, some unseen battery giving up its last trickle of power. The cockpit fell quiet. By then, the shaking in her hands wasn't just from cold, it was from the slow, dawning realization that no one was coming right now. No sirens in the distance, no cutting beams of searchlights sweeping the clouds, no thunder of chopper blades, just dark and snow, and a sky that didn't care. Emily stumbled back into the main cabin and found a relatively clear spot among the wreckage. She dragged a seat cushion down, wrapped herself in 2 coats, hers and the one she'd found, and huddled with her back to the wall, trying to tuck as much of her body away from the wind as she could. She flicked off the flashlight to save its batteries. In the dim redness, the shapes of the plane's interior blurred into one uneven, monstrous silhouette. It was then, in the quiet between gusts of wind, that she heard it. A low, distant sound from outside. Not the shriek of storm, not the creak of cooling metal. A long, rising call that seemed to come from somewhere deep below thought. A wolf's howl, stretched and thinning across the valley. Emily had grown up in the American West. She knew what wolves sounded like from documentaries, from that one camping trip, from the way locals talked about livestock lost in the night. Still, hearing it here, now, sent a different kind of cold through her body. It wasn't just fear of the animal, it was the realization that they belonged here more than she did, that she had fallen, uninvited, into someone else's territory. There were more howls then, overlapping like a conversation carried on in syllables of hunger, some closer, some farther. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound lived inside her now, echoing against her ribs. "Just stay inside," she whispered to herself. "Stay put. They'll send a search party. Planes don't just vanish, they'll find you." In her mind's eye, she saw the digital maps in some distant control room, an air traffic controller's brow furrowing when a blip disappeared over the mountains. She clung to that image until exhaustion finally dragged her down into a fractured, shallow sleep. The gray light of morning woke her, hours or maybe minutes later. The emergency light had gone completely dead. Pale daylight seeped in through the hole in the fuselage, revealing more detail than she wanted: the frost blooming on armrests, a thin rime of ice on the inside of the broken windows, the way snow had begun to pile in the corners of the cabin. Her breath fogged in front of her with every exhale. She forced herself to stand. Her left leg shrieked protest, but she gritted her teeth and put weight on it anyway. Sprained, strained, bruised, whatever it wasn't enough to stop her. If she stayed here, waiting, she'd freeze before anyone found the wreck, if they ever did. Outside, the world was white and jagged and infinite. The plane, or what was left of it, had come to rest on a slope near the crest of a mountain ridge. Above them, the peak rose in sharp, dark rock. Below, the land fell away into a wide valley, tree-covered and shadowed, disappearing into a haze of distance and snowfall. There was no sign of roads, no power lines, no plumes of smoke from chimneys, just wilderness. The snow wasn't deep yet, but it was enough to show tracks. A trail of paw prints circled the plane at a cautious distance, back and forth, overlapping in impatient loops. Some were small. Some were large enough that her fist could fit inside the outline. Wolves for sure, maybe more than one pack. The prints led away and downhill, toward the line where bare rock gave way to forest. Rescue crews will look for the wreck first, she thought. Planes, helicopters, they'll look from above. If I leave, will they miss me? The thought hung there, heavy. Then another thought landed beside it. If I stay, those prints might come closer next time. She gave herself a timeline. One night at the wreck, and she had survived. One more might be different. She could either die waiting politely for help or die moving, trying to change her odds. Of the two, only one seemed to offer even a slim chance. Back inside, she packed quickly. She stripped the dead for what she needed, apologizing under her breath even though she knew they couldn't hear. A better pair of boots from a man 2 rows back, a wool hat from the woman with the blue suitcase, a scarf from the seat pocket that still smelled faintly of someone's perfume. She wound it around the lower half of her face, savoring the small barrier against the air. Her backpack grew heavier. Energy bars, the water bottle now filled with melted, filtered snow, the first aid kit, extra socks, a torn blanket she could wrap around herself at night. In a pocket near the galley, she found a flare gun with 2 cartridges left, sealed in a bright orange case. When she closed her fingers around it, she felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. Before she stepped out into the snow for real, she paused at the torn opening and looked back. The cabin seemed even more unnatural in daylight, a metal carcass ripped open on a white hillside. The bodies were shapes now, anonymous and still. She thought again of the woman who'd asked her to tell her son something she'd never gotten to say. "I'll get out," Emily murmured. "I'll make this mean something." Then she turned away and started down the mountain. The first few steps were the hardest. The slope was steeper than it had looked from above. Snow slid under her boots, turning each footfall into a negotiation. She used a piece of broken seat frame as a makeshift walking stick, stabbing it into the crust to anchor herself. Her injured leg wobbled but held. Her breath came in ragged clouds. The world was unnervingly quiet, the kind of muffled hush that only comes after heavy snowfall. Her own movements seemed too loud. The crunch of boots, the hiss of sliding powder, the rasp of her breath in the scarf. Every now and then she stopped, heart hammering, convinced she'd heard something in the distance. a branch snapping, a low growl, the flutter of wings. Each time, after long seconds, there would be nothing but the wind. She aimed for the tree line. Trees meant shelter, meant possible firewood, meant cover from the wind. They also meant less visibility, less warning of anything approaching. Still, staying exposed on the open slope felt like walking across a blank page where anything could be written in her blood. By midday, the sun was a weak disk behind thinning clouds. Her fingers, despite gloves, throbbed with cold. Her injured leg felt like someone had tightened a band of hot iron around her calf. She paused on a rocky outcrop and looked back up toward where she'd come from. The plane had vanished into the contours of the mountain, just another white and gray shape among many. If she hadn't known exactly where to look, she wouldn't have seen it at all. That realization cut through her like another gust of wind. Even from a few hundred feet lower, the wreck was almost invisible. From the air, with weather like this, they could fly over this valley a dozen times and see nothing. She turned away so she wouldn't have to think about it. She saw the bear sign before she saw the bear. It was a patch of disturbed snow near a cluster of rocks, a wide, scooped-out area where something had dug or bedded down. In the center, a pile of dung steamed faintly in the cold. The tracks that led away were enormous, 5 broad toes, claws like blunt knives imprinted in the snow ahead of each pad. Grisly, her brain supplied unnecessarily. Big, heavy, recently here. All the air seemed to leave her lungs at once. For several seconds, she froze exactly where she stood, body insisting that if she didn't move, the universe would forget she existed. Then she forced herself to breathe, to crouch and look downhill. The tracks led away toward the trees, a lumbering, deliberate line through the white. She didn't see the animal itself. Maybe it had moved on, maybe it was sleeping, maybe it was watching from somewhere she couldn't see. But from that moment on, every shadow between rocks, every stump half buried in snow became a potential shape with teeth. The first wolf she actually saw came later, near dusk. The sky was bleeding orange into purple when Emily stumbled onto a narrow ledge carved into the side of a steeper drop. Below, the land fell away in a near vertical face, jagged with ice. Above, the rock rose in a wall she couldn't climb, not with her leg and her shaking hands. The ledge itself was only a few feet wide, enough for a cautious sideways shuffle. There was no good place to go back, and nowhere else to go but across. She set her shoulder against the stone and inched along, placing each foot as carefully as if the air beneath her were made of glass she could crack by breathing too hard. Halfway across, something made her glance back over her shoulder. It stood at the far end of the ledge where she'd started. A wolf, larger than any dog she'd ever seen. Its fur a thick, mottled gray and white, eyes pale in the fading light. Its stance was relaxed, almost curious, head tilted slightly to one side. Behind it, higher up the slope, silhouettes moved between the rocks. 2, 3, maybe more. For a moment, the world narrowed to the distance between her and that animal. She could see its breath plume in front of its muzzle. It sniffed the air, then took a single step forward, paws sure on the snow. Behind her was the drop. Ahead of her were wolves. Emily's heart raced so hard it hurt. She didn't have a gun. She didn't have bear spray. What she had was a walking stick, a backpack, and a flare gun with 2 shots. "Stay back," she whispered, knowing very well the wolf had no reason to listen. Her voice sounded foolish even to her ears. The wolf took another step, slow, deliberate. It wasn't rushing. Predators didn't have to. They had time. The others behind it paced along the ridge, their outlines ghostly in the twilight. She fumbled the flare gun from her pack with clumsy hands, almost dropping it into the void. She flipped the case open, loaded one of the cartridges with a shaky click, and aimed not at the wolf, but high and to the side. She squeezed the trigger. The flare burst out with a violent hiss, streaking past in a bright red arc, trailing smoke. It slammed into the cliff face above the wolf and exploded into a shower of sparks. For a brief second, the whole ledge was bathed in crimson light. The wolf flinched back, lips pulling away from its teeth in a snarl. The others melted into the rocks like shadows retreating from fire. Emily didn't wait to see what they did next. As soon as the flare ignited, she kicked herself into motion, scraping along the ledge, ignoring the way the world tilted and swayed beneath her. Bits of ice and rock slid away under her boots and tumbled into the darkness below. She kept her shoulder pressed to the wall until, finally, the ledge widened into a more stable patch of slope. She collapsed onto her hands and knees, gasping, listening. The flare's light died down quickly, leaving only after images on her retinas. The wolves didn't follow onto the narrow path, for now. But they didn't leave either. She could hear them sometimes between gusts of wind, a scrabble of claws on rock, a low huff, a distant, questioning howl answered by another farther away, a chorus building slowly in the falling night. By the time she found shelter, the stars had begun to appear. It wasn't much, a shallow cave carved into the side of a hill, barely deep enough to be called a cave at all, more like an overhang, where rock bellied out over a small hollow. But it was out of the wind, hidden from casual view, and the ground inside was dry and clear of snow. For Emily, at that moment, it might as well have been a furnished cabin. She crawled into the space and sank down with her back to the stone. Her entire body shook, part adrenaline, part cold. She dug the lighter from her pack, gathered a handful of dry twigs and brittle grass she'd passed earlier, and coaxed them into a small, stubborn flame. The fire felt like a miracle. Even its smoke smelled good. Outside, the valley settled into deeper darkness. The wolves' voices rose and fell, sometimes close enough that she could distinguish individual tones, sometimes so far they seemed like echoes of their own echoes. Once, somewhere much nearer, she heard the heavy, snorting breath of something large moving through brush, followed by the crack of a branch breaking under weight. The sound faded without coming closer. She kept the fire small but steady, feeding it with what wood she had, knowing she would pay for every stick tomorrow when she needed more. Alone with the flames, her thoughts began to drift. The crash replayed in her mind in disjointed fragments. The way the masks had dropped, the flight attendant's face, pale but controlled, the last text she'd sent before takeoff, joking with her brother about who would win the annual Hart Family Gingerbread Disaster Contest. She saw the faces of the dead, the man in the flannel, the woman who'd asked her to deliver a message, and a hollow guilt opened in her chest. Why them and not me? The question had no answer, but it clung to her ribs anyway. She pulled her phone from her pocket, even though she knew there was no signal. The battery icon glowed at 15%. The network indicator showed nothing but a bleak, no service. She thumbed over to the voice recorder app. If they never find me, she thought, this might be all that's left. Her hands trembled as she hit record. She began, and winced at how small she sounded. She cleared her throat. My name is Emily Hart. If someone finds this and I'm not here anymore, I was on the flight from Chicago to... She paused, frowning, then shook her head. I was on a flight that went down in the mountains. I don't know exactly where. It's cold. There are wolves. I'm trying to get down to the valley. I don't know if I'll make it. She swallowed, eyes stinging. Mom, Dad, Jake, if you ever hear this, I'm sorry. I should have called more. I should have stayed on the phone that night when Mom wanted to show me the stupid Christmas lights on the porch, and I said I was too busy. I should have done a lot of things. Her voice broke. She waited, breathing through it, until she could speak again. I'm trying really hard to get home. I swear I am. She ended the recording and stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then she turned the phone off completely to save what little power remained.
At some point in the long, stuttering hours that followed, she started hearing things that weren't there. A murmur like voices outside the cave, speaking words she couldn't quite hear.
Her mother calling her name from somewhere beyond the ridge. Laughter, achingly familiar, like Jake's when he'd beaten her at Mario Kart. Every time she jerked awake, she realized it was only the wind funneling through rocks, the fire popping, the wolves rearranging themselves out in the dark. But the line between memory and sound grew thinner with each waking. When morning came again, she was no longer sure she trusted her own senses. The fire had burned down to coals. Her muscles ached as if someone had beaten her in her sleep. But when she crawled to the cave's mouth and looked out, the world was still there, cold, indifferent, beautiful in a way that made her angry. On the gray horizon, a speck moved. At first, she thought it was a bird, some large crow or eagle catching a thermal, but it grew bigger, resolved into something mechanical, a helicopter, its body a dark silhouette against the brightening sky. It moved along the valley slowly, methodically, as if tracing some pre-planned grid. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Tears rushed to her eyes so fast they actually hurt. She scrambled for her backpack, wrenching it open, hands searching for the hard plastic edges of the flare case. She found it, snapped it open, loaded the second cartridge with fumbling urgency. She stumbled out into the open, snow up to her shins, her legs screaming, her lungs burning with each breath. "Hey!" she shouted, as if her voice could possibly carry that far. "Down here! I'm here!" The helicopter couldn't hear her, she knew that, but she shouted anyway. She aimed as high as she could and pulled the trigger. The flare burst upward, a streak of violent red carving a brief wound into the morning. It arced above the tree line, trailing smoke and sparks, then blossomed into a burning star hanging for a long, impossible second in the air. The helicopter flew on. "Please," she whispered, watching it. "Please, please look." The aircraft began to drift past her position, continuing along the valley. For a heartbeat, it seemed like it would simply pass by, no more aware of her than the wolves or the bear or the mountain itself. Then, slowly, its nose swung around. The body dipped, turning toward where the flare's smoke still smeared the sky. A ragged sound tore out of her. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, something raw and halfway between. She waved her arms, feeling suddenly foolish and enormous and very small all at once. The helicopter drew closer. She could see details now. The rescue markings on its side, the way its searchlight cut through the lingering haze. The light swept across the slope once, twice, then pinned her in its bright circle. She stood there blinking up at it, haloed in white and shadow, a scrap of human life in a landscape that had almost claimed her. Somewhere behind her, in the trees, the wolves began to howl. The sound rose in a strange, wild counterpoint to the chopping thunder of the rotors. It wasn't angry, exactly. It wasn't even afraid. It sounded, to Emily's exhausted mind, almost like farewell. She turned and saw them at the edge of the tree line. 3, 4, maybe 5 shapes, standing still and watchful. Their eyes caught the reflected light, glowing for a moment like distant stars. Then, one by one, they turned away and slipped back into the forest, swallowed by branches and snow. Men descended from the helicopter on ropes, their bright jackets almost surreal against the muted palette of rock and ice. Hands reached for her, voices shouting questions she didn't quite process. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else clipped a harness to her and told her she was safe now, that they had her, that she was okay. As they lifted her into the air, the ground fell away, the cave shrinking to a dark comma on the hillside. The valley unrolled beneath her like a map she'd never learned how to read. Somewhere up there,
Hidden among the folds of stone lay the broken plane, the bodies, the ring of tracks circling the wreck. Somewhere, under the snow, were the footprints she'd left in her stubborn, terrified descent. Emily pressed her face into the blanket and finally cried without trying to stop herself. Later, back in a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and clean linens, reporters would ask her what it had been like out there. People would call her the Christmas Crash Survivor, a title that sounded like it belonged to someone braver, someone who hadn't been afraid of every shadow. They'd ask about the wolves most of all, as if the wildness fascinated them more than the metal and fire and screams. She would tell them the truth as best she could, that the night was long and cold, and that the mountain seemed intent on swallowing her whole, that the wolves were never as cruel as the silence between their howls. She would never be able to fully explain the feeling of standing alone on that slope, flare gun in hand, knowing she might live or die, and that the world would keep spinning either way. But sometimes, lying awake long after visiting hours ended, listening to the distant sounds of hospital machines, she would hear it again in memory. The howl and the answering roar of a helicopter engine, the voice of the wild, and the voice of the world she'd fallen out of crashing together for one impossible moment. And she would wonder just a little whether she'd truly been alone out there at all, whether something ancient in those mountains had chosen, for reasons she'd never understand, to let her go.